My husband told the wedding hostess I was just the driver. I smiled, set down my gift, and walked back to the car. 2 blocks away, I pulled over and waited. They should have checked what was inside the box. The hostess looked at her clipboard a second time, then a third, running her finger down the column of names the way people do when they're hoping a name will materialize if they look hard enough. It didn't. "I'm sorry," she said, with the careful tone of someone trained to deliver bad news to people wearing good clothes. "I don't see you on the list." I was wearing a black midi dress I'd bought specifically for this night, pearl earrings, my good heels, the ones I saved for occasions that mattered. I had driven 40 minutes in holiday weekend traffic to get here. I was holding a silver gift box with a navy ribbon that I had wrapped myself because I do everything myself, which is the central fact of my life and the thing this story is really about. "Could you check again?" I said. "It might be under my married name, Reyes, Mara Reyes." She was checking when Vivian appeared. My mother-in-law materialized from the interior of the venue the way she always did, as if summoned by the scent of someone else's discomfort. She was in a silk gown the color of champagne, diamonds at her throat, a glass of something in her hand that I would have bet money was her 4th gin of the evening. She looked at me standing in the entrance with my silver box and my good heels, and she smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Did you actually think you were invited?" she said, loud enough for the 2 bridesmaids visible behind her to hear every word. She leaned close enough that I could smell the juniper on her breath. How pathetic. The bridesmaids looked at each other with the smirk of women who have been given permission. I turned to my husband. Ethan was standing 6 feet away near the entry table, a champagne flute already in his hand, tie loosened, looking like the version of himself he became around his family. Bigger, louder, entitled in a way he only remembered he was allowed to be when I wasn't the audience. He had seen the entire thing. He had watched his mother lean into my face and laugh. He looked past me at the open bar. "She's just the driver," he told the hostess pleasantly. "She's dropping off a gift." The hostess blinked. The bridesmaids smirked. 3 senior guests near the entrance turned to look. Something happened inside me in that moment that I have tried to describe to people since and can never quite get right. It wasn't humiliation. I'd had 8 years of practice building immunity to that particular feeling. It wasn't grief or rage or the hot sting of tears I could feel my body considering. It was something much quieter and much more dangerous. It went still. Everything went completely, terrifyingly still. I smiled, not sadly, not apologetically, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes because it isn't meant to. "Of course," I said softly. "Then please give them this." I set the silver box on the entry table, navy ribbon, heavy, heavier than a crystal vase or a set of dinner plates had any reason to be, beautifully wrapped. I turned, walked back through the entrance, crossed the parking lot in my good heels, got in my car, and did not cry. I drove 2 blocks, pulled over under a live oak tree on a quiet residential street, cut the engine, and waited. Here's what none of them knew about me. My name is Mara Reyes. I'm 34 years old. I'm a senior risk analyst at a financial forensics firm in Chicago, which means I spend my professional life finding the things that people have hidden inside numbers, discrepancies, patterns that don't fit, lies wearing the costume of legitimate transactions. I am very, very good at my job. And 3 months ago, while Ethan spent a long weekend at Pebble Beach with his college friends, supposedly, I was sitting at his home office desk at 2 in the morning, the house dark and quiet around me, watching a digital safe open for the second time because I had written down the combination the first time I had watched him open it, 2 years earlier, and filed the number in a place inside my head that I keep for things I might need later. I am very, very good at that too. I had been married to Ethan Mercer for 8 years before I understood what I had actually married into. We met when I was 25 and he was 27, at a fundraiser for a literacy nonprofit where I'd volunteered since college. He was charming in the specific way of men who have been told they are special since childhood. Attentive, funny, magnetic when he wanted to be. He was finishing his MBA. He had student loan debt that would have made most people flinch, and a confidence about his future that somehow made the debt seem like a temporary clerical error rather than a real number. I was making decent money at my first analyst job. Not remarkable money, but enough. I paid for dinners while he finished the degree. I picked up the rent difference when his firm's signing bonus was delayed by 6 weeks, then 12, then quietly stopped being discussed. I told myself these were short-term imbalances in a long-term partnership. Ethan's mother, Vivian Mercer, had money the way some people have a personality, as the dominant defining feature that organized everything around it. She owned a consulting firm that had made her wealthy in the 1990s and had spent the subsequent decades converting that wealth into social standing, which is a full-time occupation in the circles she ran in. She was sharp and theatrical and had the ability to make you feel, in a single look, that your shoes were slightly wrong. She had never liked me. Not from the first dinner, not ever. I was not from the right family, not from the right background, not from the world she had designed Ethan to inhabit. She was civil enough in the way that women of her class are civil, the kind of civility that is actually a sustained, elegant form of dismissal. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself Ethan chose me, not her. I told myself that for 8 years. The first real crack appeared 18 months into our marriage, at a dinner for Ethan's firm where I overheard him describe me to a senior partner as supportive in the background, the kind of phrase that sounds like a compliment and is actually a category, a way of placing someone outside the conversation. I drove home that night telling myself he was nervous, that it was the social pressure of client-facing events, that it didn't mean anything. cracking. The second crack came when he made partner. I had worked 2 years of 60-hour weeks, my own overtime, not his, to build savings that covered the gap when his variable comp came in low during the 2 lean years it took him to climb. When the partnership came through, there was a celebratory dinner at the kind of restaurant where the menu doesn't include prices. His mother sat at the head of the table. His sister Caroline sat beside him. I sat at the far end, and the toast Vivian gave did not mention me once. I drove home from that dinner thinking, if this is the pattern, what does the pattern become? I filed the question and kept going. The affair I found by accident, in the way people find things they should have looked for earlier. A phone left unlocked. A name I didn't recognize appearing 4 times in an hour. I didn't confront him. I'm a forensic analyst. I don't confront. I document. What I found in the following weeks confirmed the affair. A woman named Priya, an associate at his firm, 18 months of messages that made the nature of things clear. But the affair wasn't the thing that stopped my blood cold. The money was. The night Ethan left for Pebble Beach, I waited 2 hours after his car pulled out of the garage. Then I went into his home office, sat down at his desk, and opened the digital safe. Inside, a laptop I had never seen. Matte black, no branding, the kind of machine you buy specifically because it has no identity. And a thumb drive taped to the inside of the safe door with a strip of electrical tape, which is exactly where someone who thinks they're clever hides something they believe is hidden. I put on gloves, nitrile, the kind I keep for document work, and opened the laptop. I am a senior risk analyst specializing in financial forensics. I have spent 11 years learning how money moves, how it hides, how the trail it leaves behind can be mapped if you know what you're looking at. I have testified in 3 federal cases as an expert witness. I have a certification in digital forensic accounting from Northwestern and a clearance that I am not going to name in this story. What I found on that laptop took me 6 hours to fully comprehend. 3 years of systematic embezzlement from the escrow accounts at Ethan's firm, a mid-size M&A advisory shop with 17 partners, and a client roster that included 2 publicly traded companies and several private equity funds with combined assets in the billions. The mechanism was elegant, in the way that fraud is always elegant when someone smart designs it. Fractional diversions timed to large transaction closings, amounts small enough per instance to fall below standard audit flags, routed through a series of shell entities that existed on paper and nowhere else. The shells were controlled by one beneficial owner, Vivian Mercer. Her name appeared 47 times in the documentation, not always directly, sometimes through a management company, sometimes through a charitable foundation registered in Delaware that had never filed a public 990 and had no verifiable activity. But the routing was there. The IP addresses were there. The encrypted email threads, like which I recovered using tools I have legitimate access to through my firm's forensic license, were there. Total amount diverted over 36 months, $4.3 million. Of that amount, $250,000 had been routed in the past 6 months through a vendor account registered to a company called Mercer Event Solutions, which, when I traced it, was a shell created 8 months ago for the express purpose of paying for Caroline's wedding. Every orchid, every bottle of champagne, the string quartet, the venue deposit, the dress Caroline was going to wear down the aisle, the honeymoon booked at a resort in Tuscany, all of it. Stolen money. I sat at that desk for a while after I finished, just breathing. Then I photographed every document, transferred every file to an encrypted drive of my own, replaced everything exactly as I had found it, and went to bed. I did not sleep, but I went to bed. I spent the next 3 weeks doing what I do, building a dossier, not rushing it, not reacting, constructing something that had no gaps, no assumptions, no soft spots where a defense attorney could find purchase. Tab A, the embezzlement transactions, mapped to the corresponding client account closings they had been diverted from, with timestamps and routing numbers. Tab B, the shell company registry filings, the beneficial ownership records, the bank account signatories. Tab C, the email threads, decrypted, printed, cross-referenced with the transaction dates. Tab D, the Mercer Event Solutions vendor account, the invoices paid from it, the wedding vendor receipts I had obtained through a combination of public business registration data, and in 2 cases, a polite phone call from my firm's associate who identified herself as conducting a routine vendor audit. Tab E, my own financial records. 8 years of bank statements showing the transfers I had made to cover Ethan's gap years, the shared expenses I had carried disproportionately, the money that had flowed from my labor into a household that was also being funded by theft. This wasn't legally relevant to the fraud case. It was personally relevant to me, and I included it because I needed to see it written down. 312 pages total. On a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks before Caroline's wedding, I drove downtown to the Dirksen Federal Building and walked into the FBI's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network field office. I had called ahead, using the contact number I had from a previous case in which I had served as an expert witness. The agent I met with was Special Agent Dominic Parrish, 12 years in financial crimes, formerly with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, a man with the methodical patience of someone who has spent his career following money through mazes. He read the first 40 pages while I sat across from him. He did not rush. When he looked up, he said, "How long did this take you?" 90 days, I said. From initial discovery to today. He was quiet for a moment. "Ms. Reyes, I need you to understand that once we open this, it goes where the evidence goes. We can't promise you control over timeline or outcome. I understand, I said. And you understand the whistleblower protections under Dodd-Frank apply to your employment situation, but not to any personal or civil matters. I have a separate attorney for that, I said, because I did. Her name was Patricia Okafor, 22 years in financial litigation, former federal prosecutor, a woman who had told me on our first meeting, after reading my documentation, "You've essentially done my job for me." Agent Parrish took the dossier. He told me they would be in contact. He did not tell me when. I went home, made dinner, and waited for Ethan to come back from work. I smiled when he walked in. I am very, very good at waiting. The 6 weeks between that meeting and the wedding were the strangest of my life. I knew what was coming. I did not know exactly when. Agent Parrish had called me twice with verification questions, both times from a number that showed up as unknown on my phone. On our second call, he had said carefully that the Bureau was actively developing the matter, which I understood to mean that they were building their own corroborating case around my documentation before moving. I had also filed for divorce. Patricia Okafor had advised me to file quietly, serve the papers through a process server rather than in person, and let the legal clock start running while the criminal process did the same. The papers were filed on a Thursday. They would be served after the wedding, on the Monday following, which Patricia had selected specifically because by that point, based on what she had heard from her contacts, the federal matter would be in motion, and Ethan's ability to respond to civil litigation would be significantly complicated. I had also done one more thing. I had built the gift. It was a silver box, 12 by 16 inches, wrapped in navy ribbon. Inside, 312 pages of forensic documentation, a complete duplicate of what I had given Agent Parrish, assembled in the same tabbed order, printed on acid-free paper that archivists use because it holds up. At the bottom of the box, beneath the last tab, I had placed a small Bluetooth speaker, no larger than a hockey puck, wired to a burner phone and programmed to auto-answer on the first ring and broadcast through the speaker at full volume. The phone number I had given to no one. Only I had it. I had rehearsed what I would say. Once, into the mirror in my bathroom at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, wearing my pajamas, speaking in the steady, level voice I use when I testify in court. Then I put the script away and trusted myself to remember it, because I always do. I had also checked the wedding planning spreadsheet, the one I had built myself 8 months earlier, before I was removed from the planning process after Vivian decided I wasn't a good fit for the committee. I still had the copy on my Google Drive. At 8:45 p.m., per the timeline I had personally constructed, the best man would present family gifts at the head table. I knew exactly when Ethan would open the box. Standing at the entrance that night, listening to Vivian say how pathetic in front of the bridesmaids and the guests and my husband of 8 years, that was the moment I understood that I had been right to build what I built. Not because it validated my anger, because it confirmed what I had known for months, that these people were never going to surprise me. They were going to be exactly who they had always been, right up until the second the floor opened underneath them. I set the box on the entry table with both hands. "Of course," I said. "Then please give them this." I smiled at the hostess. I did not look at Ethan. I did not look at Vivian. I walked back to my car, drove 2 blocks, and pulled over under a live oak tree on a residential street where I could see the venue lights through the branches. I cut the engine. I put the phone on the seat beside me. I checked the time. 8:31 p.m. I waited. 8:38, 8:42, 8:44. My hands were completely steady on my knees. I noticed that specifically, the absence of trembling. After 8 years of absorbing the weight of another person's life while being told I was supplementary to it, my hands were the stillest they had ever been. 8:45. I dialed. Later, from witness accounts that were eventually part of the public record, I was able to reconstruct what happened inside the tent. The best man, Ethan's college friend Marcus, who would later cooperate fully with federal investigators in exchange for immunity, had carried the silver box to the head table as scheduled. He had set it in front of Caroline, who was still in her dress, champagne in hand, radiant in the way brides are when they are the center of the universe, and haven't yet understood that universes have edges. Ethan had been at the head table when the box arrived. He'd glanced at it, seen the navy ribbon, and apparently said something dismissive. Marcus recalled the words as probably something sad from Mara, and reached for it himself. When the phone inside rang, he picked it up. Of course he did. His voice came through the speaker when he answered. Surprised, a little amused, the tone of a man who believed whatever was about to happen was going to be manageable. And then mine replaced it. "I hope everyone's enjoying the $250,000 wedding," I said, in the same voice I use when I testify. Level, clear, no heat, especially the partners from Ethan's firm. Every flower, every drop of champagne, every stitch of that dress, paid for with your stolen money. The tent went silent, according to 3 separate witnesses, in the way that large spaces go silent when something too large to process has just entered them. Senior partners set down their forks. A managing director from Ethan's firm, a man named Gerald Whitmore, 26 years at the company, the kind of institutional memory that notices things, pushed back his chair slightly. Vivian was on her feet. She was across the tent in seconds, according to Marcus, who watched her move through the crowd with the focused urgency of someone who understands exactly what is happening and is 3 seconds behind stopping it. She grabbed the box. She began tearing through the tabs, scattering pages, looking for the speaker, clawing through 312 pages of documentation that, even in her panic, she had to understand, in some part of her brain that was still functioning, was not going to get better the longer she looked at it. Ethan had dropped the phone. It didn't matter. The speaker continued. I know about the Cayman Foundations, my voice said. I know about the Peterson acquisition escrow. I know about all of it. A pause. I had timed it deliberately. You called me the driver tonight, Ethan. You were wrong. I'm the whistleblower. The call cut off. 3 seconds of absolute stillness. Then the front gates of the venue filled with red and blue light. 4 black SUVs, 3 police cruisers, 15 federal agents in FBI windbreakers, moving through the tent with the organized efficiency of people who have done this before and will do it again and are completely unimpressed by orchids. Special Agent Dominic Parrish led the team personally. I learned that later. 12 years in financial crimes. He had chosen this particular night deliberately. The firm's senior partners would be present. The evidence could be seized in a context that maximized both its legal utility and its visibility to the professional community that had been defrauded. He understood optics. I respected that. Vivian was handcuffed at the head table in front of every socialite she had ever lunched with, every charity board she had ever chaired, every person whose respect she had spent 30 years purchasing with money that was not entirely hers. The diamonds were still at her throat when they walked her out. She was screaming. Witnesses used that word consistently, screaming. But by that point, the pages were scattered across the tent floor, and the agents had the box and the Bluetooth speaker and the burner phone and 312 pages of documentation that I had spent 90 days building so that there would be no gaps. Ethan did not scream. He went to his knees. That detail stayed with me longer than I expected it to. Not with satisfaction exactly, more with the feeling of seeing something confirmed. He went to his knees because that is what people do when the weight of what they have done, carried for so long inside the fiction of a life that appeared successful, finally arrives all at once. The knees go first, then everything else. Caroline, in her stolen dress, stood at the head table and watched her wedding become a federal crime scene. I was sitting in a dark car 2 blocks away, watching red and blue light strobe through the branches of a live oak tree. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I didn't feel the hot rush of vindication I had expected for 8 years of small and large diminishments, for every dinner where I sat at the wrong end of the table, for every introduction where I was described as supportive in the background, for the night my husband told a hostess I was the driver. I put the car in drive. He wasn't wrong about that part, as it turned out. I had been driving. For 8 years, I had been the one behind the wheel, keeping the thing moving, covering the distance, doing the work that doesn't get acknowledged because acknowledged work stops being useful to people who need you not to notice what you're doing. I drove. Vivian Mercer was indicted on 14 counts: wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and several others that Patricia Okafor explained to me over the phone the morning the indictment was unsealed, reading from the document with the quiet pleasure of someone who has done this work for 22 years and still finds a clean indictment satisfying. Ethan was indicted on 9 counts. He hired a defense attorney who spent 3 months trying to build a case around the argument that he had been misled by his mother, a position that might have been more sympathetic if the evidence hadn't included encrypted emails between them discussing the routing structure in language that left no room for misinterpretation. He pled guilty to 3 counts in a negotiated agreement: 18 months, minimum security federal facility, 3 years probation, full restitution. The firm, or what remained of it, was placed under a consent decree and a court-appointed monitor. Gerald Whitmore, the managing director who had been in the tent that night, became the de facto head of the restructured entity. He called my office 3 weeks after the arrest to thank me, which was a strange conversation, and which I ended as quickly as professionally possible. The divorce was finalized 7 months after I filed it. Patricia secured a settlement that included my full financial contribution over 8 years, calculated to the dollar using my own records in tab E of the dossier, plus interest. The marital home, in which my down payment had constituted 60% of the initial equity, went to me in full. Ethan signed the papers from federal custody. He sent me one message through his attorney, which Patricia forwarded to me and which I read once. I hope someday you understand how much of this you caused. I read it. I put the phone down. I went back to the document I was working on. There is an end to this story, but it doesn't arrive with a bang. It arrives quietly, the way things actually end when they're real. 14 months after the night at the venue, I was sitting on the porch of the marital home, my home now, the one I had always carried 60% of, on a Sunday morning in early fall, coffee in hand, reading. The neighborhood was quiet. A neighbor's dog was doing something ridiculous in the yard across the street. The light was the color of the specific September light that has always made me feel, for no articulable reason, that things are going to be all right. My phone buzzed. A news alert. Vivian Mercer, sentenced to 84 months federal prison. Restitution ordered, $4.3 million. I read the headline twice. Then I put my phone face down on the porch railing, picked up my coffee, and looked at the street. I thought about the entry table, the navy ribbon, the hostess's careful face. I thought about the look on Ethan's face when he reached for the phone inside the box, confident, a little contemptuous, certain that whatever was coming was going to be manageable. I thought about the 8 years of believing that being useful was the same as being valued, that working quietly in the background was a form of partnership rather than a form of disappearance. Then I stopped thinking about it. I finished my coffee. I went inside. I started a new document for a case my firm had brought me that week, a real estate fund with a discrepancy pattern that was either a clerical error or the beginning of something much larger. I suspected it was the latter. I opened tab A. I got to work. She's just the driver, he'd said. He wasn't wrong. I had always been the one driving. The difference, the one he never understood, the one none of them understood, is that drivers choose the destination.